I want to begin with a very big claim. And this claim is, I believe that what St. Ignatius gave to the Society of Jesus in terms of the spiritual exercises, Ignatian spirituality, is going to be to our generation and generations to follow in this millennium as big a gift as Benedictine spirituality has been to the cultivation and evolution of humanity in the arts, in education, in civilization in the Middle Ages. Simply because if you listened very carefully to Father Isaac's homily, what he talked about is we have become insensitive to the value of human life. What happened on that platform? Why did that happen? Now, we're not here to examine that, but we can look through the lens of Francis and say, well, never before in the history of humanity have we been able to communicate as quickly and as efficiently as social media. We have the technology. But never in the evolution of humanity have we come to a point where we are so disconnected relationally. Agreed? That's my claim. And I think that what Francis has and what he is offering to us is not just how to proceed in terms of movement and magisterium and jurisdiction, but what he has to offer to us is a way of being in the world that is profoundly relational. Profoundly relational. Okay, so that's my very first big claim. How to become contemplative? We cannot understand Pope Francis until we locate ourselves in the middle of understanding his formation as a Jesuit. And by formation, I don't mean the theological alone. He's brilliant. He's brilliant. We know that. But I want to know, how did this man at age 78 become the man that we so admire? We, in a sense, watch him, the finished product. How did he get to be like that? This man was totally immersed in his world, and yet he is profoundly contemplative. And let me give you the definition of contemplative as I'm going to use it this morning. To be so poised that at any moment when God walks by, we are aware. To be so poised, if we're changing a diaper, taking out the garbage, in the middle of leading a parish council meeting, in the middle of what you do at work, to be so aware and so sensitive that when God walks by, you know it. To be contemplative in our day and age, we can't come to that point unless we give ourselves times of silence and solitude. And more does not make better. More does not make better. So my first challenge to us is, as we are attracted to Francis, how did he get to be like that? One of the ways is carving out time in the middle of a very busy day for silence and solitude, okay? I also want to make a distinction this morning. Monastic does not mean contemplative, and I think sometimes we use those coterminously. Monastic has everything to do with a wonderful vocation that is given to people like Father Isaac to withdraw from the world and to engage the world in silence and solitude and prayer for the world and for all that is going on. Okay? Other than Father Isaac, not a one of us has been called to that wonderful vocation in this room. But we are all called, monastic or active, to be contemplative. And that's what I want to unpack with us this morning. Okay? So that's what I'm going to work through this. But let me begin by sharing with you a very short video clip. Some of you may have seen it. It was on Facebook, making the rounds, with two of my very, very favorite people. Stephen Colbert, you know him from Comedy Central, okay, or formerly of Comedy Central. You know, he is very Catholic. He's very Catholic, and he teaches religious education at the parish that he belongs to. So you need to know that. And of course, Father Jim Martin. Who doesn't know Jim Martin, right? So take a look at this clip, and then I'm going to do we'll talk a little bit about this.
This is the two cameras, right? You know, you might want to, could you close the door so people don't just like wander in? Be like, where are my gallows? I'm going to say I like you better without the beard, actually.
I'm going for sort of a George V look here.
Mad George. All right, so say when. Okay, roll it. So hi, I'm Father Jim Martin. I am editor-at-large at America Magazine, and we are here with someone that I hope you know, Stephen Colbert. Welcome to America House.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much to be on our little show here. So since it's Lent...
It's more show than I have right now. I've given up television for Lent.
What are you giving? Do you actually give things up for Lent? Or?
Yeah, I do. A lot of times I'll give up, like, meat or booze or something like that. But it's Mardi Gras today, and I haven't figured it out yet.
Okay.
Is there what's the hot thing to give up this year?
I have a Jewish friend that actually tells me what to give up. He calls me. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he calls me every year because he decided a long time ago in college, actually my Jewish friends in college at Penn, said, who tells you what to give up during Lent? And I was like, well, we do. And they were like, what the hell? That's easy. We should tell you what to give up for Lent. So in the last 26 years, my Jewish friend has called me Rob, his name is, he has a name, and he has told me what to give up. And it's a spice, a foodstuff, and a candy. So yeah, so I get it every year. Yeah. Hold on. A spice, a foodstuff, foodstuff, candy. So like cinnamon, Milky Way bars, and like filet mignon.
That combination.
Here's a question for you. I'm actually dying to ask you this. If you had one thing to say to Pope Francis, what would it be?
What
you could say, or two things.
I say that. Oh boy. What's the first, what do you do to get that smile on your face in the morning? What do you do? I remember hearing about Mother Teresa saying, get up in the morning and smile and say yes. Smile and say yes. I did that this morning. I did this morning. I went to a funeral this morning. And after the funeral, I was going up to my offices over at CBS, and I took a deep breath, and I did that little exercise, the smile and say yes. But the Pope seemed so happy. I was wondering, what's your regimen in the morning? What are you doing? What's your 5 minutes getting out of bed in the morning?
What do you think he would say?
Probably prayer. He'd probably say prayer. That, and the fact that you're Pope.
Yeah, that's
What about the crisp these white robes are?
That's right. Who are these? Who's your favorite saint?
I like St. Peter because he's so flawed. My confirmation name is Simon, for Peter, but not for Peter. And I kept it secret because it was for my brother Peter, who had died. But I didn't want people to go, oh, you picked a confirmation name for your brother who had died. So I just chose Simon as my stealth for my brother. But I always like Peter because, he's the rock, but the rocks are between the ears. Because he has the insight or the grace to know that you are the Messiah, the Son of God. And then he denies Christ.
Well, right away
he's angry, he's known as having an anger. So I like him because he's super flawed.
One of my theology.
And yet he gets the big job.
He does, that's right, at the end.
Yeah.
Favorite scripture passage?
Oh, so I say, you do not worry about who by worrying could change a single hair on his head or add a cubit to the span of his life. And then I'm going to skip a lot and go, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Like that entire Matthew 5 is that 5:24.
You're asking a Catholic, not a Protestant.
I don't know. But that was actually the reading on our wedding that so I said, you do not worry. I think it's great because I really like That Jesus isn't saying like, try not to worry. He's saying, so I say to you, do not worry. It's, you know, it's a command.
It's a command, right? Amen.
Do not worry. And I'm not very good at it, but I like it because it's, you know, as, you know, to quote another gospel, Dune by Frank Herbert, fear is
Which
the
is where Jesus got a lot of his stuff.
Exactly, Jesus was the original idea. The Kwitzak Hadarach, fear is the mind killer. And so, to stay mindful, you have to not live in fear. And so, do not worry allows you to be mindful and to be grateful and ultimately, I suppose, to be joyful, and everything else comes from that. Because if you're, that's why I like comedy, is like I've said this before, but you can't, it's sort of autonomic that you can't laugh and be afraid at the same time.
So that was,
yeah.
So that was your wedding, at your wedding you had that reading?
So do not worry,
Wow.
yeah.
Of
Of course, everyone's going like, what are you worried about your marriage?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Something about your marriage that's really worrying
Part of the
you?
priest, I'd say, well, that's an interesting choice.
Yeah.
Favorite hymn? Favorite Catholic hymn?
Here, pretty good one. I like Here I Am, Lord. I like O Come, Emmanuel. It's good. You know, it's Christmassy, but it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
It's bigger than Christmas. What do you mean? It's like it's more resonant than just the season.
Do you like all the 60s hymns, like Sons of God and all that?
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Yeah, that's a
I
good
was like,
one. You do like that?
No, I'm not a big guitar master.
Do you like
person.
Sons of God? You remember that one? Sons of God, hear his holy word, gather. You know, remember
Don't know that one.
Here,
The King of Glory comes, the nation rejoices. Open the gates before and lift up your voices. Who is the King of Glory? He's Emmanuel, the promise of ages, the King of Glory. That's all we know. No.
let's see. In all of Galilee and city and village, he goes among the people curing their illness. Of course, the fact that illness and village, that's what I like about that.
Yes, well, that's one of the miracles. That's one of the miracles of our Lord, is rhyming illness and village.
Thank you for joining us here at America House. Happy Lent and Happy Easter.
Happy Lent to you,
Thanks for
too.
the
We'll
dance,
see you
too.
on the side.
Awesome.
Goodbye, Catholics.
Yeah, so how do you follow those two? Very carefully, I'm sure. So he raises a really good point. If you had one question to ask Pope Francis, what would it be? We're not going to look at that, though, this morning. What I'd invite you to take a couple minutes and just ponder. What is it that you find most attractive about Pope Francis? And if you have a pencil or a pen, just on the back side of the green sheet, just jot that down, because we're gonna work with that. What attracts you to Pope Francis? Okay, got it? What attracts you? His warmth. As Pope, to say, who am I to judge? That suggests what virtue that this man has. Humility. Humility. How many of you actually put down humility? Okay, great. What else did you?
And holiness.
Holiness. But how do you understand holiness? That's a pretty broad concept.
Yeah.
Mysterious. He's got a sense of mysteriousness about him, doesn't he? Yeah. What else? Please.
Commoner.
He's a commoner. Interesting.
I put down that he gets it. I've said that ever since he's been elected.
He gets it. What does he get?
He gets the gospel message of Jesus.
He gets the gospel message of Jesus. All right. What else?
He's got the courage to look for the deepest why.
The deepest why.
Going a little bit more back to Jesus,
Uh-huh.
where, I think the church is sort of built on all these layers of people reasoning about stuff.
Reasoning.
And I think he is always looking to say, okay, so this is where we are, but where did that really come from? And I think we kind of strayed from that.
Right. Okay. We strayed from that. I just want to pick up from that on that for one second. Because what you're locating is critical and central to who he is. There is a point in the spiritual exercises. How many folks have made the spiritual exercises here? So, okay, a few of us. Well, it's that long retreat, that 30-week retreat or 30-day retreat that Jesuits have to make twice in their lives. Once in novitiate and once about 25 years later before they make final vows. 25 years. Isaac, how long is your formation?
Ongoing, lifelong.
Ongoing. Oh, you're longer than Jesuits. Wow. Just getting started. But at the end of the exercises, Ignatius has the person who is making the retreat do the long look back over the entirety of the experience of prayer. And what do you notice? What are the graces that you've received? And he does that specifically for us to take a look at what we have been given. And from what we have been given, how do we want to reciprocate and give to the Lord? It is in that moment of reflection that is already part and parcel of who he is in his own spiritual development, where he takes a look at exactly how did we get here as a church. And what we have noticed is what often happens in our lives. Culture, changing culture, so many paradigms that are in movement, we begin to internalize them unconsciously. And what happens, and I think this is Francis's big question, who is in service of whom? Is the church in service of God? Or are we in service, is it the other way around? And when I talk about church, I'm not just talking about the institutional church. I am talking about the people of God. And what he is saying, I think we've heard it already, he gets it. What he gets is we need to be held accountable because we, in a sense, have strayed. And we expect that God is going to work for us instead of the other way around. Now, we can look at that with rather critical eyes and the church, but let's bring that home for 1 minute. What happens if you don't get what you pray for? Some people are frustrated. Where does that come from? There's an expectation implicit in that prayer. You are in service of my desires, O God. Do you see how easily that becomes part of our expectation with God? So Francis is really calling us. He's holding our toes to the fire. We are in service of God. God is not in service of us. All right? Clear. What else? What else attracts you to him? John?
His openness to others.
His openness, yes. There's a huge inclusivity. Catholics only? No. So from the very beginning of this presentation, we have to know that when we are looking at Francis's contemplative gaze on the city, he is not just looking at the urban experience. The city is for him the world. The city is the world. All right, what else did you come up with? Please. Joyful. Where does he get that? Not just because he's got the big job, as he said, all right? Okay, we'll come back to that. Somebody else in the back. A gentleman in the back. Who else? Yes. He's open-hearted. Compassion. Where does a person learn compassion? Which, by the way, is Jesus, I think, Jesus' crowning virtue. How does a person learn compassion? Very difficult in our culture today.
You have to get away from yourself and kind of experience something with the other. You have to feel it yourself in order to have true.
We have all suffered.
Yeah.
We have all suffered. Suffering is a norm of life. But what our culture tells us is that suffering is bad. And so it's to be alleviated at all, so, I mean, look at our culture. How many of you have lost a parent or a spouse and you're working? How many days do you get to grieve? What are your work policies? You get a week? And then your employer expects you to pick up where you left off. Psychologists and theorists of grief tell us we at least need 3 to 5 years. Now, of course, we can't take that hiatus from working because we have to pay the mortgage. But look at what is implicit in those policies. To be compassionate, as Francis is compassionate, means he sat in his own suffering. And that man, I am sure, in the darkest nights of his soul, could cling to only one thing that our faith gives us. Suffering for the Christian is redemptive. It sensitizes our soul. It makes us a little bit more acutely aware of the value of all of creation. It also allows us to be comfortable with other people who suffer without wanting to do what our culture does. Run away from it, pretend that it doesn't exist, or make it better. Because we're a culture of chiefs. Okay? Francis got to be who he was. He was born in a barrio. He was born in a slum. He was novice master on a farm, who would get up at 4:30 every morning, do his prayer, and by 5:30 every morning was in the laundry, doing laundry for 100 seminarians. He was formation director. And it goes on and on and on. This man did not shield himself from the reality and the suffering of other people. Okay? So compassion. Who's in service of whom? Anybody else? Did we exhaust this list? He gives us great hope, doesn't he? Yes. One more, please.
I get the sense that he's not afraid. He lives in the freedom of Christ, I think.
Yes, and let me say a word about that. Where does he get to be as free and courageous as he is in one of the most powerful institutions in the world? It's part of his formation as a Jesuit, and it's part of formation in Ignatian spirituality. It's called being indifferent, and it is not the same way that we use indifferent in our culture. Okay? To be indifferent in our culture means that we don't care. All right? But to be indifferent in the spiritual sense means that I am accountable before God for what I hear from God and how I respond. That's the essence of obedience, obedere. I hear and I respond. So if Francis is hearing a message from God and he wants to respond as fully as possible, he's going to be tempted by what Ignatius calls inordinate attachments. Now, we all have attachments, okay? I've got this 10-year-old Springer Spaniel, a dog. She is my ultimate attachment, inordinate attachment. I live for that dog, okay? I need a therapist, I know. We're working on this. I think there's some midlife stuff mixed in there. Anyway, so I have this. The inordinate attachment is something that can threaten us, hold us paralyzed, and hold us back from doing what God is asking us. So can you imagine if Francis was inordinately attached to what people thought of him. Imagine the same thing for us. If we were inordinately attached to what people think of us, it would prevent us from speaking the truth. And here is the test of Francis's holiness. He speaks the truth. He lives in consolation. Consolation means one is always in movement toward Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life. That is where his joy comes from. He is not inordinately attached to that. What will people say of me? He has people who do not agree with him. He knows that. But notice how respectful he is in his dialogues. Okay? So, if I can just bring this little part to some closure here. I want what he's got. You know where that comes from. You know where that line comes from? You saw the movie Harry Met Sally? Yes. Well, I use this in a very different context. But I do want what he has. And the question is, as Isaac offered us this morning in his reflection, do I have what it takes? And here's what it takes. Simply, easily, it is the hardest thing we will ever do in our lives. Can we make ourselves available to grace to be stripped of ego? I'm going to give that to you again because I think that's what he operates out of. Can we make ourselves available to grace? Grace meaning the presence and the activity of God within the human person. So that I am available to grace, I am stripped of my ego, and I might do what God asks me to do in the world. I would venture to say that all of us in this room are attracted to that. And if you have that desire to be stripped of all that is not of God, that is a holy desire. Pray for a deepening of that grace. It's wonderful. That then gives us the indifference to move forward. And to be prophetic. He is prophetic. What are the categories? You know, when you study the prophets in the Old Testament, the prophet is one who surveys the situation and he names the ills. Okay, if you take a look at those white sheets that I gave you, he actually enumerates 15 of them. We're going to get into that a little later. He names the ills of society. And then he says the prophet is prescriptive. How do we come back to the Lord? For us, it's how do we regain our humanity? And how do we respond? We have choice. We have choice. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay, good. Let's move along. Getting to the heart of and understanding Pope Francis, I think a lovely way to go about doing that is taking a look at his coat of arms. First of all, there are a lot of books that have been written in the past 2 years, now that we're coming up next week on his anniversary, right? On the 13th. Many books have been written already, biographies on Pope Francis. I think that they are terribly in error, simply because very few of them, there's only one that I know of, that talks about him being a Jesuit and formed as a Jesuit. You cannot understand Francis, how he understands relationship with God and the world, until we fully understand the essence of his formation as a Jesuit. Now, I know Father Salmon was here, and I know he did the whole Jesuit thing with you, but I'm just going to review it a little bit, just in case. Well, I'm going to review it anyway. Okay. So if you take a look at the Pope's coat of arms, which he also used when he was, except for a little bit of the mitre at the top, okay, which he used as it was his episcopal insignia. What you find striking in the heart of this
The keys.
it's the symbol of the Society of Jesus. IHS, it's the symbol of the Society of Jesus. No, this. So if he deems to put that right smack center of his coat of arms, you know it's very significant.
Oh, I see.
All right. The other thing I want to draw attention to, I wish I had more time because I think to examine this coat of arms could be a whole talk in and of itself. But the other thing that's important is his motto. Now, I'm not going to try to read the Latin at the bottom. I gave you the translation at the top because poor Sister Mary Amard, God bless her, who taught me Latin, would cringe at the way I would pronounce those words. So I'm not going to do it out of respect for her. But listen to his coat of arms. Because he saw him through the eyes of mercy and chose him. There's another way of translating that, and here's the shorter version. Having mercy, he called him. I want to go back to the Gospel of Matthew, where this comes from. Somewhere in Francis's formation, he prayed very long and very hard over this particular text. It is from the 9th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, verses 9 through 13. As Jesus was walking on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting by the customs house and said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And while he was at dinner in the house, it happened that a number of tax collectors and sinners came and sat at the table with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your master eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When he heard this, he responded, "It is not the healthy who need the doctor, but the sick. Go and learn the meaning of the words, 'What I want is mercy and not sacrifice.' And indeed, I have not come to call the virtuous, but the sinner." Francis was praying over a reflection on the homily of St. Bede the Venerable. Maybe that's a Freudian slip. And in that homily, he came to understand something a little bit deeper that was happening in this particular gospel text. The gaze and the look that Jesus had on Matthew struck to the heart of Francis. It had to, because it still has potency to this day for him. What was going on? Bede pulled this out of his own prayer and his own reflection. When Jesus looked at Matthew, he got it. He got Matthew's humanity. The man was rather conflicted. Here he was, a Jew, working for Rome as a tax collector, collecting taxes from his own people. You see the problem here? Okay. Can you imagine how the rest of his tribe, his Jewish tribe, was responding to him? They were like outcasts. They were pariah of society. But Jesus doesn't do that. The look that he gives him is one that says, I understand the complexity of the human condition. I understand the complexity of the human condition. I get the tension that you find yourself in, Matthew. Who am I to judge? And the text goes on. Matthew got up and followed him. Now, we can take that literally, and yes, became a disciple, of course, okay. But read deeply into that text. Following does not mean leaving everything and going. Yes, it does, but on a deeper level, what it means is go and do likewise. And my friends, we cannot go and do likewise unless we have looked into the eyes of Jesus and known exactly what Matthew knew at that moment. That, I believe, is a particular grace, a charism we call it in the church, that was given to Francis for us. It was his prayer, his contemplative prayer, that led him to understand the complexity of human nature and to not judge, but to do what he can to raise up humanity. And as we've noticed, that is the biggest poverty of our culture today. We have lost a sense of humanity. And it's not unique to our culture. In my reading of the scripture, in my pondering on the heart of God, I've come to conclude that God's dream for the world is not success, it's not achievement, but it is that we become more humane. And what led me to that conclusion was watching Jesus, page after page of the Gospels. No matter who he encountered, everyone walked away differently. He did what he could to restore their humanity. That's our call. If we, like Francis, are going to take to heart that gospel text that has named his pontificate, his leadership as archbishop, as cardinal, and as pope, we need to consider that, because that is how he looks on the world with that contemplative gaze. How can I, within the orbits of family, religious congregation, parish, monastery, wherever we live, wherever we work, contribute to the betterment of humanity? And it can be as simple as acknowledging the presence of another human being. I believe that is what Jesus' greatest gift to us is. Presence to another human being. We see it in Francis, and we want what he has. Because that's how he looks on the city. From his prayer, stripped of ego. He's not working for anybody else but God. That's what gives him the integrity to call us to conversion. We see it in himself. You do not get to be and do what he does without exposing oneself to being available to grace and allowing God to transform. We may not get the big job, but it's not about the big job anyway. At least not for him, right? Okay, are we good on that? Make sense? Any questions or thoughts as we move on to the yellow sheet? And I'm going to have to move through this very quickly. Taking a look at Francis's biography very, very quickly, and I'm just going to skim through some of this, and you can read this on your own. He was born in a slum. He was the oldest of 5 children. You can pick that up just by watching him. Okay? His father leaves Italy because of the Mussolini regime, and he meets his lovely wife. At age 6, grade 6 rather, he has Jorge, has his first experience of Catholic school, the Salesians of St. Bosco. I think their charism is education of young children. He then goes to the high school, a secondary school, which would be comparable for us, a technical school, okay? A technical school. And then I love the last part of that. He worked as a bouncer. Talk about understanding the human condition, both under the influence and not of the influence. A janitor sweeping floors, and he ran tests in a chemical laboratory. So you see that after school, he had some life experience. We don't have somebody who went from high school seminary to a minor seminary to a major seminary. Something's happening differently in his life formation. In 55, he goes to the seminary. This is a diocesan seminary. Now, what I want to draw our attention to is who captures our imagination of a 1955 priest? Ding, dong, ding. Bells of St. Mary's. Dial 04. O'Malley. Didn't you folks ever watch that movie? I mean, you got to watch it. That's like a obligation that you do around Christmas time. You know, every Catholic watches the Bells of St. Mary's. You know, he longed for the old days. Okay, but it does capture, in some ways, you know, a sense of an era of priesthood. Okay, for most of us, as I gaze around this room, our sainted mothers prayed for what? A priest, the firstborn, yes. And if the firstborn was not a boy, she prayed for her daughter to be a sister. Now, where does that come from? Okay. The theology of baptism before Vatican Council was rather hierarchical. Okay, so if one really wanted to be holy, you went to the Trappist monastery. You gave it all, right? Priesthood, religious life, married life, single life. What Vatican II did was it went to retrieve the theology of the early Christian church, which said holiness doesn't rank. The theology of baptism is horizontal. We are all in this together. So if you are being called to respond to the fullness of your vocation, and if that's in a monastery, go to the monastery. If it's to be married and you can realize the fullness of your baptismal call, be married, have children, have a wonderful full life. But you see, the value is here. All right? So I think we're still working out of that 50 years later. You know, I think sometimes some of us still have that image of this hierarchy. But Francis doesn't seem to have that. How do we know? He's collaborative. He's collaborative. He does not do top-down, does he? He created the, what did they call it, the Gang of Eight? You know, the 8 cardinals from all over the world for the reform of the Curia. He wants to know about families. He's talking to people who actually have them. He wants to know, what are the struggles? What is a family in this culture? What is a family in this time? We have so many different versions. Okay? So he's collaborative and he is reflective. All right, let's move quickly through this. Now, he enters the Society of Jesus. He's got a call. He's a novice in 58, makes his religious profession of vows. Now, what's interesting, go down a couple. What Jesuits do after they study philosophy is they usually teach for 3 years. They call that the regency. Look at the subjects that he's teaching. Psychology and literature. They're very closely entwined. What he is seeing here is the complexity of the human condition. So he already has internalized in his study of these disciplines the human condition. What he's going to bring to them, as we see now on the world stage, is what? A sensitivity to that. Because for him, because of the incarnation, the human being has tremendous value. God became man. We take great value in that. That's why our moral theology is what it is. All right? He completes his studies. He's ordained a priest. Notice what's next. He is novice master. Let me tell you a little bit about novice masters in the Jesuit order. Some will say that it is a more important position than the provincial. And what they look for when they want to call a man to be the novice master is someone who embodies the charism of the society. So already back then, this man embodies the charism of the society. And what is that? In the very beginning of the spiritual exercises, St. Ignatius writes, "To make this retreat, you are a retreatant. For the rest of your life, you are an exercitant." How do you like that? That's a big word. Exercitant means one who exercises these spiritual disciplines your whole life. The exercises are all about conversion. A reform of life that has at its center relationship. Relationship primarily with Jesus and the Trinity. Relationship with the self, so I'm not disconnected from myself. And relationship with the world. That's his MO. That's what he has lived his whole entire life. So already as a young Jesuit, that was identified in him. And he, as novice master, he also taught philosophy, he taught theology. But again, he lived on a farm with these young men. Today he calls us, in one of his homilies, I forget which one it is, but one of his homilies, he talks about what the world needs now is not more teachers. What the world needs now is people who witness by their very lives. Notice the man does what he says. So he has been exercising, and that conversion for him is making himself available to grace. To have the ego stripped, to be available to go wherever God wants him to go. All right? He makes tertianship. Now, this is an interesting piece. Remember early on I said that Francis, as a Jesuit, well, the Jesuits usually joke about which things they will celebrate first. 25 years of being a priest, their 55th birthday, or final vows. That's how long it takes. There also is in the Jesuit constitutions that a man cannot hold a primary office of leadership. He cannot be a superior, he cannot be a provincial, he cannot be the head of a university or college or a high school, unless he is in final vows. Do the math. They had to push up his final vows by at least 10 years. So this man entered the leadership position of his congregation minus 10 years of life formation as a Jesuit. So when he becomes provincial, most Jesuits talk about everybody held their breath because this guy as a provincial did not hold a wonderful track record. What we see now is, and he's also talking about it, how he learned from his mistakes. From provincial to pope on the other side, quickly. Okay, so you can take a look at all this stuff, but what I want you to go to the third last bullet. As cardinal, he's appointed to administrative positions in the Curia. Look at all the areas that he is familiar with. These departments, I think there are about 30 of them, okay? It runs the strata of human life. So no wonder he's calling for a synod on the family. This man is in touch with the world. By immersing himself in the world, in the city, and he withdraws every day to pray for the city. And then he goes into retirement, and guess what? You know the rest of the story. So there it is. In Ignatian spirituality, mission flows from identity. We're all captivated by this picture, aren't we? When this first happened, I think the world was stunned. Not only does he say, and this is not unique to his pontificate, because when he was back in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, he also went to non-parish places like jails and hospitals and prisons. And he would make himself available to the poorest of the poor, because remember, to the Jesuits, they take that fourth vow, right? And that fourth vow, at final vows, is to go wherever the Holy Father deems it necessary to send someone. Now, you can do that in a big formalized way, but the Jesuits internalize that, to go where nobody else is going, even though the Holy Father may not call them, but if the provincial calls them. So we find them on the edges of working with refugees. We find them going places where nobody else is going, because they've heard the call from their prayer to go and be the presence, to go and lift up humanity. So when Bergoglio has this experience of not only washing the feet, but kissing the feet, that carries a very powerful message for us. How does he understand himself as a pope? One who serves. Why? That is his experience of so closely identifying with the Master. If Jesus did this, he counts it a privilege to do it also. It brings us to the threshold of what? How shall I proceed? Can I embrace this? Can I serve in these humblest of ways? Francis comes from a very different worldview. Okay? A worldview has everything to do with a way of perceiving reality, values that govern our lives, and they're a set of integrated principles that gives meaning and purpose to our lives. Let me just capture for you what I have learned from Joe Kelly. Joe Kelly is a professor emeritus from Nazareth College. I sat in on a lecture that he gave, and I thought this was brilliant of his awareness. He says there are 4 worldviews that we have today in our society. The first one is what he calls the gourmet. It means that my goal in life, my worldview, is to have the best. I don't want to drive a Chevy. I want the $40,000 Lexus. Because this is the consumer mentality. My life has meaning and purpose when I have something. Sound familiar? Can you see how that demoralizes and dehumanizes us? Okay, I serve in a very resourced community at Transfiguration. We have a parking lot full of Lexus and SUVs. We have people coming who live in $300,000 homes. But I'll tell you what, we have a poverty unlike any that I have ever seen. It's a poverty of relationship. It's a poverty that has both parents working 12 hours a day with 3 kids at home who have nannies. And then, you know where this is going, okay? Now, I'm certainly not saying, and I'm not, who am I to judge? But what I'm simply raising up for us is we have internalized unconsciously this culture that tells me that my values come from who I am. And I think Joe captured that very well. The second is the managerial. What is most efficient? The bottom line. How many of us in this room have lost our jobs because of downsizing? What is most efficient? What's the bottom line? Cost. Notice what's happening in healthcare. How many of you have been hospitalized lately? People are being sent home left and right because insurance companies don't provide for long-term care, right? And that's just the beginning. But we intersect with healthcare every day. What's the bottom line? Notice how this dehumanizes people. I love this one. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned yet again. Here I am. My goal is to be comfortable. Okay. A person makes decisions based on what gives them the most comfort. What gives us comfort in this society of addiction? Food, sex, gambling, pornography, technology, drugs, information. Should I go on with this litany? You know, you get my point. Francis comes from a very different worldview. His is teleological. In the teleological worldview, the goal is to be fully human. Everything ought to be used for its purpose. And what is the purpose of human life? What delights God? The human person fully alive, Saint Irenaeus. Because Irenaeus says, the person who is fully alive reflects the glory of God. The great poverty of our world today is dehumanization. Relationships. To achieve the fullness of our humanity is not just for me, it is not just for you. And this is what Francis is saying. It's for everybody. For all human beings, and I believe he would take it one step further because he proposed to set up a new dicastery in the Curia for ecology. For all of creation. Okay? Because God can be found in all of creation, so we need to be sensitive and steward that responsibly. So when Francis calls us in the midst of the city, and I'll bring this to some closure, I've got 1 minute. He calls us to a reform of attitude. And the attitude that he is calling us to uniformly across the globe, regardless of where we land theologically, ecclesially, he said what is most important, and this even transcends religion, is not just the human person, but the human person and the common good. What is good for all people? The attitude that needs to be reformed is the gourmet and the comfort and the efficient attitude. That is a very, very tall order for us. You have the white sheet. Here's your homework. Because I love to teach, you all have homework. If you want an insight into, a deeper insight into what we're talking about today, this is Pope Francis's Christmas gift to the Curia. But I want to expand that a little bit more because Pope Francis, you know, he's very savvy. He knows that the press is going to pick this up and people are going to use this. He is not just addressing the cardinals. He is addressing the cardinals as a point of departure to work towards this attitude of reform. To bring us into, as St. Paul says, one mind in Christ, Philippians. To bring us into one mind in Christ. And so what he does is he enumerates the ways in which human beings have strayed from the common good. He wants to call to mind, again, the value of the human person. Okay? So in your spare time, because you want to become more contemplative, right? So here's a little Catholic guilt for you. In your prayer, I'd invite you to pray with this, perhaps for the rest of Lent. And when you do approach this document, and of course this is, I've kind of tweaked this, okay, to make it a little bit more readable. Do not approach this document other than the way Francis would approach this document, with mercy. He gets the human complexity. Who am I to judge? If he's not going to judge, if Jesus is not going to judge, we may not judge ourselves. But to bring ourselves to that moment of grace, Lord, what in me? Which one of these 15 fit? Where's ego a part of that? And I beg you, O Lord, to have mercy and to transform me into the likeness of the Son of God. Because, my friends, that is all we live for. As Christians, as Catholics, that is what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. That we be transformed into the image and the likeness of Jesus Christ. I leave you with this final note from Pope Francis. Amen? Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damien, for that wonderful presentation, which has given lots to contemplate to us. So, and I would invite you all to please come again next week, where we're going to hear from Father Bill Donnelly, who will be celebrating the 9:15 Mass, and Sister Peg Brennan, a sister of St. Joseph, who works over near Holy Apostles, serving the city over there, who's going to share some insights about going out into the periphery. So, not only come, bring a friend. We'd like to have as many people as we can to hear these wonderful presentations about